translated by Fakhr Hussain, who's also from Lucknow. This is the book in English.
Okay.
Very famous. There's a couple of other books on the history of Lucknow in Urdu. Yeah, there's some others, but this is the standard text that comes to mind. So let's leave all that aside. This is becoming just a collection of fascinating digressions. Yes. Al-kalamu yajurru al-kalam. So I think you have a copy now of the Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So I think it's instructive, even though this is about fallacies in the strict sense, namely formal fallacies. This is worth reading, and J.L. Mackie was quite a good philosopher. So please refer to that again. I think you have, if you don't have a copy of the complete works of Aristotle, you can always find, they're out of copyright, and you can find copies online. On the Gutenberg Project or whatever, you can find that. Now, Kreeft claims that his is the only modern textbook of logic that has this many material fallacies in it, 49 of them, right? But he says that there are two other books that are exclusively devoted to fallacies. In other words, they're not logic textbooks. So one of them is called Fallacy, the Counterfeit of Argument, by someone named Holther, Holther. Published New Jersey Prentice Hall, 1959, which lists 51 fallacies. I don't have this one, but I just ordered it today. You should be able to find it on A-Books for about $8 if you want. A paperback, I don't think this will ever be published again. There's no new copy on Amazon, no new edition.
Okay.
So this is tells us something about the state of affairs today. Now then, this is not a digression, but this is also important. So I don't have that book, but then I have this book, which is Historians' Fallacies by David H. Fisher. This is extremely important, Toward a Logic of Historical Thought. I think you should read this book because a lot of what is involved in Islamic studies has some historical dimension, doesn't it?
Of course.
Naturally, if you're studying the Sīʿah, there's a historical dimension. If you're studying history, naturally there's a historical dimension. And if you're studying hadith, but almost anything has a historical dimension. I mean, if we talk about some ruling of Murtada al-Ansari, he's not living today. Murtada al-Ansari lived when? 12-something. He died in 12-something, didn't he? Of the Hijrah.
Of the Hijrah.
So let's say it's about 2 centuries ago. So there's going to be some historical dimension, isn't it? So sometimes we have to ask questions which are of a historical nature. How do we ask those questions? And often historical questions are open-ended, and how do we resolve them? A lot of history is done in a very sloppy fashion. So I think this is a very useful book to study. Historical fallacies, and they're important questions that we come across in our tradition. Here's a historical question. Did Abdullah ibn Saba exist? And if he did, is he anything like what the so-called image of him is in certain historical sources? Was there actually a movement associated with his name called the Saba'iyya? If so, what were their doctrines? These are historical problems. They involve historical research. Did Sulaym ibn Qais al-Hilali exist? According to Professor Hussain Mudarrisi Tabatabai, no. Yet we have a book called Kitab Sulaym ibn Qais al-Hilali, which is a text which is very disputed and very controversial in Shi'i tradition, among scholars anyhow. These are historical questions. Did the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ explicitly designate Ali ibn Abi Talib as his successor? That's obviously a historical problem. Right.
Yeah.
So there are lots of things which come under. And unfortunately, a lot of what Muslims write on history is really questionable. And this applies even to recent times. I mean, I don't know if you've ever bothered. I briefly did because I visited these countries, so I came across what was being studied. But there was, years ago, there's a book called the Annual of, there's not a book, there's a journal called the Annual of Urdu Studies.
Okay, the annual...
I don't know if it's still published, but, you know, there was a professor of Urdu from Kanpur. He became a professor of Urdu at University of Chicago, what was his name? Chaudhry Muhammad Naeem, C.M. Naeem. He used to edit it, and I think it was edited by someone else named Muhammad Omar Maiman. I don't even know if it's still being published. But at Princeton, they had a whole bunch of old back issues, so I sat down and was flipping through them one day. And there was this article on history textbooks in Pakistan. And the author had analyzed these and found these to be quite remote from the world of facts. And actually, when people concoct some sort of a nationalistic origin for themselves, you know, they have to come up with all sorts of national myths, and there's distortion.
And naturally, your enemies will look worse. For example, if you look Herodotus and his history, how he portrayed the Sassanids and the Persians.
You're quite right. So we come across this kind of stuff in history all the time. That was a very interesting article, but again, like if you read even later works, for example, I remember at one time I was researching the history of a Naqshbandi Sufi master in India who's known to posterity as Mujaddid al-Fisani. The renovator, the reviver of the second millennium of the Hijrah. He was otherwise known as Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi. And there was a very interesting dissertation, Ph.D. dissertation, which was published, which was done at McGill by the Israeli Orientalist Yohanan Friedman. I came to know this. He was a very fine, very refined European gentleman. I came to know him at Princeton. He was there for some reason when I was there, visiting there. Anyway, so he looks at how Ahmed Sirhindi is cast in a certain light by 20th century Muslims in India in the British period who were writing and then afterwards. And it's not, and so they portray him a certain way. They give him a certain slant. Anyway, these are concrete examples. And it's important to have concrete examples because in the end we want to use logic for this kind of stuff. We're not going to be using a lot of these very contrived, very, very formalistic examples which we study in logic, right? And so I think that Mullah Abdullah is quite right. We have to give a lot of attention to the actual use of logic in certain fields. So that also I wanted to bring to your attention. In terms of history also, the philosophy of history is important. So this is a book I would recommend to you also, a companion to the study of history and the historian's craft. These are all things which I think people in Islamic studies should read. Historian's Craft by Mark Bloch, A Companion to the Study of History by Michael Stanford. Okay? So that's on history, but coming back to fallacies, there's also an important book on fallacies called With Good Reason by Morris Engel. It's very readable, and I think you can probably pick this up somewhere used. It may still be in print. I bought it used years ago. This is also very useful. He gives a lot of good examples and exercises.
Now, sorry, what's the name of the book once more?
With Good Reason, An Introduction to Informal Fallacies. So instead of calling them material fallacies, he's calling them informal in the sense of not formal. Now, I did say that in the 5 arts, or Sana'at al-Khams, we have rhetorical arguments as well. So the field of rhetoric is also very important and related to logic, especially in ancient times. So the study of rhetoric is also important, and for that I recommend this book, Ancient Rhetorics for Contemporary Students. Also available used. There's probably a new edition now. This is the 4th edition. There may well be a 5th now. So how do you write a persuasive paper? How do you construct an argument of that sort, for example? Among many other rhetorical exercises. All right. So with all of that background and dancing around and digression, we now get to the heart of the matter. Kreeft divides fallacies into 7 groups, categories. The first are fallacies of language, followed by fallacies of diversion. In other words, where you misdirect the person from the actual argument. And if we liken intellectual debate to an armed physical confrontation or an unarmed one, if you have studied any of these arts, you know that diversion is part of it. You will act as though you were going to punch or strike with a weapon, or in the left hand or the empty hand or the right hand. You do some sort of fake move, distract the person, and then go in for the kill, as it were. So that's what fallacies of diversion are in terms of a technique for arguing. Third are the fallacies of oversimplification. Fourth are the fallacies of argumentation. Fifth are fallacies of induction. Sixth are procedural fallacies. And the most interesting for me, because I enjoy metaphysics, is the seventh, or the metaphysical fallacies. But we will go through these one by one. I think it is very much time well spent if we go over these things carefully, because they are so important in real arguments rather than contrived arguments that are cooked up in logic books, especially in just formal notation. So the first one, he has 7 under each, giving us 7 times 7 is 49. Yeah. So let us look at equivocation. That's the first one. He's got, under fallacies of language, he has equivocation, amphiboly, accent, slanting, slogans, hyperbole, and the so-called straw man. I think we can probably do 2 of these today. 2 groups, fallacies of language and fallacies of diversion. Or we'll see how far we get, because we have to do Arabic grammar also. So, did you read the short story, by the way, he gives at the end?
No, I did not make it to that point.
It's really funny. You could just jump into that. In fact, I think he took it from, where did that go? Because it's, oh no, he gives the citation, but it's in here. It's in this book also. Morris Engel, and With Good Reason, has this little story. He has 2 stories. One is called Love is a Fallacy by Max Schulman. Very funny, very funny. And then the story of A Town and B-ville, second semantic parable by Hayakawa. Hayakawa is a famous linguist. Yani. Those are really good examples. The thing is, you won't find this kind of stuff in the Arabic works.
You won't.
So that's a real drawback.
I like Kreeft's style. It's contemporary, it relates, he gives practical examples of how you apply logic.
Very true.
Sheikh al-Mudaffar does not really do.
Yeah, very true. But there's also a rhetorical element. All of this is involved in, when we were reading Hayy ibn Yaqdan, that's an elaborate rhetorical exercise. There never was such a child who, by some mysterious natural processes, was spontaneously generated on an island. So he constructs this fable. And, Ibn Sina did that as well, Suhrawardi did that, and these were very accomplished men who had studied logic. And so similarly, in the ancient world, people who studied rhetoric, they were supposed to be able to compose either a written piece or a speech on the spot for some sort of a subject, often involving persuasion. And that is something which is very much lost today. It is a lost art. People are extremely handicapped in their communicative abilities today. And that's just a shame, and I think it's one of the reasons...
Communicative and then memory on top of that.
Memory on top of that.
We become so dependent upon gadgets. If somebody said construct a speech right on the spot, we wouldn't have the ability to retain all that information.
Well, that's what ancient sort of education involved. There were exercise books in which they had to construct different sorts of pieces
as
for
old-fashioned as Najaf may be, this was one of the things in Najaf. I remember, one student was saying, "Can you write on the whiteboard?" Yeah. He said, "Your mind is your whiteboard. Write on that."
That's I'm not against the use of a whiteboard or chalkboard.
But it shows the mindset a little bit.
It shows the mindset, but also, many people I know who are of the older generation, who are people who lecture from the minbar. They're khutaba.
Yeah.
They're able to. The really good ones should be able to do it extempore. Okay, now maybe they have a lot of years of experience.
Yeah.
Obviously, you need to know the subject. You have to have some control over your subject. But because they have studied a lot of literature, they're acquainted with the historical text, the religious text, but they also have a huge fund of literature, whether in Urdu or Arabic or Persian or all of the above. And they're able to draw on that to quote from memory what verses, for example, which are extremely appropriate to the occasion. And the occasions are always different. They'll be lecturing in one city one week and then another one, and they may be on the same topic. It may be the exact same majlis, the same occasion, but it won't be the same.
It won't be the same.
Every performance will be different, right? So they're able to draw on that, but now we have people who have no such fund. Or if they do have a fund of experience, it's just fluff. It's junk food of the mind. It's popular culture. Or what they now call memes and so forth. Man, that's just a shame. So, under Fallacies of Language, we have 1A, Equivocation. He says it's the simplest and most common of all the material fallacies. It means simply that the same term is used in two or more different senses in the course of an argument. In ordinary language, the word fallacy is often used for any kind of mistake, but in logic, a fallacy is a mistaken argument. Alright, we've been over this material. Concepts, as he says all the time, concepts are not equivalent. It's not equivocal. It's the terms we use for them. Exactly. Only terms can be ambiguous. If you have a concept in your mind, to have that in your mind is to know what it means. So then you must use the right term.
Exactly.
If your mind has two meanings, then you're in trouble if you use the same word for them.
Exactly.
Right? If you use the same term. So whenever we use only one term to express two concepts, we can get in trouble. He gives the example of pen as in a writing instrument, or as in a place where you keep barnyard beasts, or the word bat, the animal, or the instrument used in various forms of athletic activity, such as baseball or cricket. So what do we do? If you think that there is some sort of a fallacy of equivocation in somebody's argument, what do you have to do? You must gently invite them to notice a distinction, to draw out a distinction. So you identify the term in question, and you point out that this can be used in two different ways. You make that distinction. The making of distinctions is the basic of logic. People do not like to make distinctions today, as Kreeft points out, because they have given up on thinking. Naturally, many jokes and all puns depend on equivocation. All right, let's look at some of these exercises and see what you think. Only men are rational, and women are not men. Therefore, women are not rational. Does he give the odd numbered exercise or the even?
He gives the even in the book, but
He gives the even in the book, but we don't have. When I actually consulted the odd exercises,
there's a break in the page numbers for them.
He just leaves these out. So what do you think is wrong here? What is the ambiguous term, and where do we make the distinction?
In this case, I would say men is the ambiguous term, because one, you're using it in the Oxford English Dictionary sense of referring to both without gender. And then the second, you're referring it to as the male masculine gender.
It is men in the sense of insan in Arabic, or anthropos in Greek. Anthropos in Greek, whereas if it's the male gender in Greek, I think it is aner, and the female would be gune.
That's good stuff.
And in Latin, I'm not sure. In Latin, I think man as gendered man would be vir, and a woman would be femina, right? And what is a human being, or man in the sense of human being? Do you remember? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't remember.
I looked this up once, but I don't remember now. But I think you're right. That's what exposes the fallacy of equivocation here. Okay, those who are the most hungry eat the most.
Yeah.
Those who eat the least are the most hungry. Therefore, those who eat the least eat the most. He has an H here, which means this one is supposed to be hard.
This is a temporal ambiguity. The terms of
ambiguity of time.
Ambiguity of time.
In where? Where's that?
Either if it's before you are eating, you will obviously, before you've eaten, you will be the most hungry. But the one who afterwards he will eat the least. So the most hungry has eaten. Now
there's satiated. It's a very good example. We just finished nice. Ramadan, so we know.
Exactly.
So before iftar, those who are the most hungry at iftar, they will eat the most. But then afterward, khalas.
Oh, exactly.
All right. So you're saying that there is a temporal ambiguity in the most hungry. That's the term.
And the term hungry, to be more specific.
The term hungry. Okay.
To be specific.
Good. Number 3. All laws require lawgivers, and the laws of nature are laws. Therefore, the laws of nature require a lawgiver.
The ambiguity is in the word law.
In the word law.
Physical
law as opposed to legislative law. I suppose al-amru takwini as opposed to al-amru tashri'i. Yeah. The legislative command as opposed to the command of engendering existence. Number 4. What is this long? This is a whole paragraph. Like most 10-year-olds, Sam was bored with church services. He overheard his parents worrying about this. His father said, "I'm afraid Sam is just about bored to death in church." Being very literal, this worried Sam. Later that day, Sam asked his minister, "Who were all those names on the church's war memorial plaque?" The minister replied that they were, quote, "all the people that died in the service." Okay, so that, it goes on. Sam asked, was it the morning service or the evening service? So
ambiguities in the word service, military service.
Military service as opposed to the ritual in church, but there's supposed to be 2 ambiguous terms. What's the other one?
The death being taken literally versus figuratively.
Correct. Yeah. People who died in the service. Okay. Number 5, there's an H there. It's supposed to be hard. The more you study, the more you learn.